Let me ask you something very important. Why is China investing billions of dollars in Africa when other major powers seems to be pulling back? Why are African leaders increasingly turning to Beijing for infrastructure instead of the West? When Africa finally grows into the world's next big economic market, what do you think is going to gain more? Is it China or Africa? Today, we are going to explore China's interest in Africa in a way most people don't see. We look at facts, numbers and examples, and later you will realize this is not just about aid or trade, it is about long-term strategy on the part of China. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why China is so focused on Africa, what African countries start to gain, and what the future might hold for both China and Africa. And before we start, if you like content that explains Africa beyond what you see on CNN or BBC, make sure to subscribe to this channel because we are going to be giving you updates about Africa and China relationship on this channel every single day. China didn't randomly choose Africa as a focus. It didn't see Africa as a charity project. China taking decades, not months. Every major step China takes in Africa is planned with long-term strategy in mind. Africa is a continent of 54 countries with over 1.4 billion people, and not only that, with a huge gap in infrastructure, industry, and services. Now, according to economists, where there are gaps, there are opportunities. China doesn't look at Africa and see poverty, it sees unfinished potential. While Western countries often focus on priorities and reform, China chooses to relate with Africa as partners, not teachers or reformers. It is very obvious they build roads, ports, railways that connect cities. Not only that, China expand airports, build power plants, and light up many African countries. Africa in China's eye is unfinished but promising, just like China itself was a few decades ago. An unfinished market are where long-term influence and profits grows. So from the one, China's relationship with Africa wasn't about charity. It wasn't about goodwill. It was about strategy, growth, and influence. Africa as a continent fit perfectly into China's long-term vision for global power. I will explain what I mean by this deeply later in this video. Let's talk about resources because this is where the picture gets clearer. China is the world's biggest factory. They lead in the manufacturing of phones, laptops, electric cars, solar panels, and many other home appliances mainly used in Africa and other parts of the world. There's every probability that the phone you're watching this video with was made in China. But what you need to understand is this: factories need raw material, and Africa has them in abundance. We have copper for Zambia and DRC, cobalt from Congo, lithium for Zimbabwe, oil from Nigeria and Angola, and other various resources in other parts of Africa I will not permit me to mention in this video. Now, the truth is that Africa is full of the raw materials China industries can never do without. China doesn't like depending on a certain global market because they know trade wars, sanctions, or political pressure could disrupt supply of raw materials. So instead of buying from markets, China goes straight to the source, which is Africa. They invest in mines, build roads to extract resources, and construct ports to export them efficiently. Now, this has nothing to do with exploitation. Let's get it right. It is risk management, according to China and economists. Africa guarantees a secure supply for China growing industries, especially electric vehicles, renewable energy, and tech manufacturing. Without Africa resources, China industrial growth will slow down. So when people ask why China is so invested in Africa, this is a major part of the answer. It is about future security and strategic control of critical resources, not just short-term profits. So you can see China as a country is very, very wise and business savvy. Here is a fact many people overlook. Africa is young, very, very young. In countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and Ethiopia, the average age is under 20 or 22. Millions of young consumers, workers, and future entrepreneurs are emerging in Africa. Now, compare that to China, where the population is aging rapidly and the workforce is shrinking. China as a country has already lived through industrialization and poverty reduction. China also knows that today low-income population can become tomorrow middle class, and China wants to be there from the start. That is why Chinese products are already everywhere in Africa. Phones, motorcycle, electronic clothing are all flooding in Africa. Not only that, these China products are very affordable and accessible. China is not just selling these goods to Nigeria or Africa, it is creating habits, loyalty, and brand recognition early enough, more than every other country in the world. China doesn't wait for African income to rise, it grows with Africa step by step. So by the time the continent economy expands, Chinese products are already familiar and trusted by the continent of Africa. Africa in China eye isn't a small market, it is a future giant still awakening, and China, being a smart country, wants a front row seat for that growth. One of the biggest differences between China and the West in Africa is what they prioritize. Western governments often focus on political reforms, governance standards, and long policy discussion, while China, on the other hand, focuses on something much more visible, which is infrastructure. China focuses on things people can see, use, and at the same time measure. Take railway, for example. China built the Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway, cutting transport time from days to hours. In Kenya, they also built the standard gauge railway linking Mombasa to Nairobi, improving cargo movements. So one thing we must agree is that these projects are not perfect and some are controversial, but they deliver physical results that people can see and feel. Why does this matter? It matters because infrastructure is the foundation of economic growth. Without reliable transport and electricity, factories don't work, trade slows, and business struggle to thrive. China learned this lesson at home. In the 1990s and early 2000s, China poured money into infrastructure before focusing on advanced industry. Good enough for China, African leaders often prefer this approach because it produces visible outcome. A highway can be shown to voters. A port expansion can boost trade numbers quickly, so without much talk. But let's be clear, China is not building all this for Africa for free. Infrastructure makes it easier to move resources, export goods, and integrate African economies into Chinese trade network. Every road constructed by China leads somewhere, and often that somewhere connects back to China commercial interests. So China infrastructure push is not charity. It is a strategic investment that benefits both sides, but not equally. Another reason China has gained influence in Africa is how it handles politics, or rather, how it avoids it altogether. Unlike Western countries, China rarely criticizes, African governments publicly. It doesn't demand political reform as a condition for loans or investment. It doesn't lecture leaders about how to run their country. China's approach is very simple. We respect your sovereignty. Let's do business. For many African leaders, this feels very different from Western partnership, which often come with conditions tied to governance, elections, and human rights. Whether you agree with China's approach or not, it is clear why it appeals to governments that want flexibility and control. This political neutrality has paid off for China and is very, very clear for everyone to see. Instead of the Western country to play along, they are complaining. African countries increasingly support China in international forums, including the United Nations. Now, on issues like Taiwan, Hong Kong, and human rights resolution, African votes often align with that of China. Now, this isn't accidental at all. Diplomatic support is part of the exchange. China does not need a military base across Africa to gain influence. They use loans, trade, and respect for sovereignty to build long-term political relationship. This is what the West lack in Africa. This China approach seems to be producing results than that of the West. Africa is not just important economically, it is important both politically and strategically. There are 54 African countries and each one has a vote in major global institutions. When more than 50 countries support you, your influence automatically multiplies. China understands this better than most nations of the world. That is why China hosts large summits like the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, bringing dozens of African leaders together. This is also why China continues opening embassies and expanding diplomatic missions across the continent of Africa. This is purely about balancing Western power. For decades, global institutions were dominated by Europe and the United States. China sees Africa as a way to reshape that balance. Africa provides diplomatic legitimacy, political support, and not only that, global reach. In return, China offers investment, infrastructure, and access to its massive markets. This is not a short-term play, it is a long-term strategy to reshape the global order slowly but quietly and methodically. And Africa sits right at the center of that plan for China. You see, China's interest in Africa is not only driven by the Chinese government, it is also driven by Chinese companies facing pressure at home. Over the past 2 decades, China built massive industrial capacity. Construction firms, telecom companies, manufacturers, and engineering giants grew rapidly in China. But as China's economy matured, competition increased and profit margins shrank. So there were simply too many companies chasing the same opportunities. Then, Africa offered a solution. In many African countries, labor costs are lower, competition is lighter, and demand for China goods and services is growing rapidly. Chinese companies could win contracts more easily and operate at scale in Africa than they would do in China. That is why you see Chinese firms building roads in Ethiopia, running telecom network in Nigeria, and manufacturing goods in Egypt and all over Africa. Take telecom as an example. Companies like Huawei expanded aggressively across Africa. They helped to build mobile network when Western firms were hesitant to do that. Today, a large share of African mobile infrastructure relies on Chinese technology. This expansion benefits African economies by creating jobs and improving services. But it also benefits China by exporting its business ecosystem, engineers, standard, equipment, and not only that, its management style. At the same time, they make a whole lot of money in Africa. Africa, in this sense, become an extension of China's domestic economy, a place where Chinese companies can grow when growth at home slows down. To understand China's long-term thinking, you have to understand how China looks at the world through the map. China Belt and Road Initiative is about connecting continents through trade routes. Africa fits perfectly into this vision. Ports in Kenya, Djibouti, Tanzania, and Egypt help Chinese goods move faster between Asia, Africa, and Europe. Railways and highways move resources from inland Africa to the coast more efficiently. Everything is about reducing time, costs, and risk. This is not just about quick profit. Many of these projects take years to break even. But you know what? China thinks long term. It is building a system where Africa is integrated into global trade with China at the center. In contrast, Western investment in Africa is often fragmented and short-term, while China's approach is centralized and very, very strategic. Africa becomes not just a destination, but a key transit point in global trade, all thanks to China's strategy. This is where the debate gets serious. China has helped build infrastructure faster in Africa than many Western partners, but concerns about debt are real. Some African countries owe significant portion of their external debt to Chinese lenders. Not all these loans are bad. As some section of the media wants you to believe, not all African debt problems are caused by China. The truth remains that many African countries already have high debt before China financing arrived. So Chinese cannot shoulder all the blame alone. I'm not in any way trying to be devil's advocate or defend China in any way, but the truth must be said. The real issue is negotiation and governance. Some projects succeed and boost growth. Others struggle because of poor planning, corruption, or unrealistic expectations. China is a tough negotiator. To protect its interests, Africa must do the same. China is never a savior, but it is also not a villain by default. It is a partner with clear goals. Now, let's return to the question from the beginning. Why is China so interested in Africa? China is so interested in Africa because Africa offers resources, market, diplomatic influence, and not only that, long-term growth. Another question is this: is China helping Africa or using it? The answer is both, and it depends on leadership, negotiation, and strategy. Who benefits more in the long run? The story is still being written. Africa has leverage, its population is growing, its resources are critical, its global importance is rising, and is something many countries of the world cannot do without. China understands this. The question is whether Africa will fully use that understanding to its own advantage or not. In global politics, attention is power. In Africa, finally has the world attention. What next depends on Africa choices.